Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're checking out a mod by the name of Return of the Triad. That's right, this is a total conversion mod running in GZ Doom that emulates the look, the feel, and gameplay style of the original Rise of the Triad. Now, for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with Rise of the Triad, it was a game released back in 1994 by Apogee, a studio that would later go on to be known as 3D Realms, and it was originally billed as a Wolfenstein sequel. But something happened between Apogee and id Software, and they ended up having to retrofit the idea into something a little different, and Rise of the Triad was the result. I was fortunate enough to check out the shareware version back in the day and eventually get my hands on the full version, and yeah, this is pretty damn spot on with regards to emulating that original experience. We've even got the wacky power-ups here as well. This one in particular turns you into God. Makes you grow a few inches taller, and it also grants you the ability to fling orbs of power from your fingertips, which, as you can see, just generally remove your enemies from existence. They also have the very useful ability of homing in on the nearest enemy, so usually one orb is more than enough to clear out a room, and it's a nice spin on the traditional invulnerability ability. So rather than just letting you tool around and not take damage, it transforms you into a divine being instead. Now, thankfully, this doesn't last for forever, because that would make the game extremely goddamn easy. Now, the power-ups do drain after a certain amount of time, so you're gonna have to resort to the more, let's say, traditional weaponry in Return of the Triad. Speaking of which, we've got our hands on the dual pistols right now, obviously an upgrade from the single pistol that you begin with, and at the upper echelon of the vanilla bullet-based weaponry here, you also get your hands on the MP40 machine gun, which actually spits out a decent amount of damage, but all of this kind of pales in comparison to the real meat of Return of the Triad's arsenal here, which is obviously the rocket-based weaponry. Let me introduce you to my good friend, the Drunk Missile. This is quite possibly one of my favorite rocket-based weapons in Return of the Triad, and that's because it just launches a volley of drunk missiles that do eventually find their way to enemies and just end up showering the area in a wonderful smattering of gore. Speaking of the gore, you'll also notice that on what seems to be a shockingly frequent basis, we get a lot of rogue eyeballs dropping past the screen. Now, this was actually a feature of the original Rise of the Triad, but I don't quite remember it happening with such a frequency. It seems like every other explodey gore kill I get with a rocket here in Return of the Triad is greeted with an eyeball dripping down my screen. But as you can see, we've now ran out of rockets for the Drunk Missile, and this is something that I always found interesting about Rise of the Triad, and something that they've held on for Return of the Triad. You do get a fairly limited amount of rockets, even though they are absolutely fantastic at obliterating pretty much everything. It doesn't let you go overkill, it doesn't let you go too nuts. You've got to make sure you budget those rockets for a worthy situation, let's say. That said, when I honestly think about it, there's not really all that many worthy situations. I mean, there's only one particular enemy I can think of here in Return of the Triad that you absolutely positively need a rocket to take care of, and those are the robots that can launch exploding discs at you. I mean, sure, later on in the mod you'll come up against heavy machine gunners that can throw grenades and take multiple rocket hits to take down, and of course there's also the bosses, but between those particular encounters, everyone else is pretty much chump change when it comes to how they deal with being confronted with a rocket. As you can see, everything pretty much dies the same. In fact, I'd probably say that's one of Rise and Return of the Triad's biggest weaknesses, the lack of significant adversaries here. I mean, the only time you'll ever really feel threatened when you've got a bazooka or any other of the rocket-based weaponry in your hands is when you're dealing with overwhelming numbers, and that's the precise situation you're supposed to be dealing with the rockets. You're thinning out the herd, you're making the odds more manageable. And even then, when you get down to the regular Joes, as you can see, the MP40 just tears through them. And, as you've also probably noticed, we've suddenly pinged back into God mode. No, this is not a cheat. This is a feature. So when you collect 100 of the tokens that you'll see littering around the levels, that will automatically launch you into God mode. which I feel is ever so slightly a tad overpowered. Personally, I feel like you should only really limit that to pickups, and I'm not sure if that's how it actually worked in the original game. For all I know, I think the tokens were related more to extra lives over anything else. Could be wrong on that, my memory's a little fuzzy, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I just feel like this is an aspect that maybe they should have thought about balancing rather than automatically triggering God mode. Maybe it would give you a random selection of the available power-ups. It might transform you into a dog, which is the other power-up that's available, or it might actually give you something that's not beneficial at all. It might enable magic mushroom mode, where your head starts wobbling all over the place and everything has psychedelic colors and makes it very, very hard to shoot things. That could be interesting. There could be an element of risk-reward in there over collecting 100 of those tokens, but that's an opportunity that was unfortunately missed. In terms of the levels that you'll be rampaging through here in Return of the Triad, I'm pretty sure that they're all original creations. These aren't remasters or remakes of pre-existing Rise of the Triad levels, and they clearly take advantage of a lot of GZ Doom's niftier features, because believe it or not, the original Rise of the Triad actually ran on a modified version of the Wolfenstein 3D engine. As you can imagine, it wasn't exactly the most flexible thing in the world to work with. For one, you couldn't have variation in floor and ceiling height throughout the course of a level. You couldn't have slopes. You couldn't have rooms over rooms, but they found an interesting workaround to that effect with these platforms here. These are called Gravitational Anomaly discs, and they became a little bit of a hallmark of the Rise of the Triad experience for me. It's something that marked it out as unique in my memory, something that very much set it apart from everything else. That and the bounce pads, because the bounce pads were just ridiculously fun. Naturally, however, GZ Doom here grants a lot of freedom to any level developer in terms of going absolutely hog wild, so I really have to commend the creator of this total conversion for the relative restraint. It looks spot on in terms of replicating those original levels, but it still doesn't shy away from having its own particular flair. Some of these levels honestly look pretty damn nice. There's some nifty environmental effects being used on this one in particular, and there's at least enough between the levels on show here to distinguish one from another. There's 6 in total that you'll be able to rampage through here, and as you make your way through each one, you do get the sense that you are progressing somewhere. You are heading to somewhere very different from where you started. When it comes to the layout of individual levels, however, I feel like this is something that could have done with a little bit of trimming. And I'm not really talking about these wider open spaces here. These are completely fine. I'm more talking about how sprawling some of these levels appear to be. So much so that I'd actually hesitate to recommend this to anyone with a less than stellar sense of direction. There is seriously a lot of ground to cover here, and a lot of stuff to keep track of within it. You've got your keys, of which you can have a total of 4, I believe. You've got all the switches that you can flip at various points during these levels, and all the secret doors and rooms and sections of level that crisscross over into other sections of level. You've got floor pads that act as switches as well, and it can get a tad overwhelming. And if you miss one of those things, just a single solitary thing, you can fall into that dreadful trap where you just no longer have any idea what you're doing or where you're going. Other than that, though, it's pretty good. It's a pretty damn faithful adaptation of Rise of the Triad, all things considered, maybe to its own detriment. I just feel like they could have pushed the envelope ever so slightly in terms of adding slightly even more wackier things, but I'm largely happy with what we've got here. I'm a big fan of this staff, by the way, as well. It just has such a satisfying noise when it launches, and really just tears through the enemies. If you get a lot of people bunched together in a row, or just in a small group like I'm going to get round here, you can get some spectacular gore fireworks. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch back over and see if we can get all these fatties to, yes, explode in a wonderful, wonderful fashion. It suddenly occurs to me that I've not really spent much time with the rest of the weaponry you can get your hands on here in Return of the Triad. I know I've highlighted the drunk missile and the magic staff, but what about the bazooka? Shoots in a straight line, makes the enemies go splat just as good as the other weapons. We've also got the ever-reliable Heat Seeker. If your aim's not reliable, then don't worry, this weapon will pick up the slack. Also has a similar effect to the bazooka with things going splat. And there is actually a curious difference between this and I believe the original version of this weapon, because normally it gets confused by flames in the original Rise of the Triad. Here, not so much. An interesting thing you can do, however, is turn porridge hot with rocket strikes. Now I need to injure myself so I can actually pick this up, but hot porridge is obviously better for you than cold porridge. I'm really glad that particular quirk made its way back into this version. We know what the drunk missile does. It makes things go splat, much like the rest of the weapons, but this one right here, you need to be very careful with this one. This is the firebomb. You really shouldn't be using this indoors. This is very much an outdoor weapon. It creates a cross-shape explosion whenever it strikes something, and it's a fast way to get yourself killed indoors, which is why I'm obviously using it right now. I'm a cavalier sort of chap to that regard. We've also got the dual missile, the double missile. I don't understand the double missile. It shoots 2 rockets. What more do you want to know? But then there's this. The flame wall. The firewall, even. It shoots a firewall. It turns things into skeletons. It's the best, the best, the best. We're just going to turn these 2 guys into skeletons as well, just for shits and giggles. I really love the xylophone sound effect when they crumble. It's just great. We've already met the magic staff as well, but have you met the powered-up magic staff that shoots rapid-fire bolts of death and destruction? Of course you haven't. And this is the baseball bat of Doom. These are all things that were present and accounted for in the original, and they're all frigging awesome. Honestly, if you think this looks enjoyable, you should totally go pick up the original Rise of the Triad, have a blast, play through that, and can we actually turn this hot with the baseball bat? Sadly not. Oh well, can't hurt to try. But yeah, this is certainly a mod that reminds me just how fun the original Rise of the Triad was to play. Well, thankfully being pretty damn fun to play in its own right. This is certainly a mod I would recommend to old school Rise of the Triad fans and to people who've never experienced it before. It's a fine jumping off point. And to that effect, the link, if you feel like playing it, is in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below, and as usual, feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.